I'm Nate Eaton here chatting with Keith Morrison, and on Friday night, so many people are saying we'll finally get some new information on the Daybell case. Dateline NBC is airing a 2-hour special, Mommy Doomsday. This is different than the podcast, Keith.
Yes, it's a completely different story. And even if you had been, listening to the entire 6 episodes of the podcast, what you'll see is completely different.
So if you haven't listened to the podcast, go get caught up now. Then you'll be all ready for Friday night's show. And on Friday, Keith, you're talking with several new people, but let's talk about your interview with Samantha and Jason Gwilliam. This is Tammy Daybell's sister and her brother-in-law who spoke for the very first time about this whole ordeal. What did they have to tell you?
Well, it was very, very, as you can imagine, it was pretty difficult for them to speak, to come forward. But I think that they were they're very concerned, lovely people. What a great family. And they told the story of her life, of who Tammy was. And I'd been wanting to know more about her for months because all we'd had was kind of, Tammy was a nice person who died in her sleep. And this was her story. And but also fascinating information about what occurred just a few days before Tammy died, and how that relates to the story that was told to police afterwards. Additionally, what Chad did in the days and weeks after the death of Tammy, how he explained it, what he was like at the funeral, what he did very soon after, and how he communicated with these people who had been probably his closest friends on planet Earth. He and Jason worked in the same building together, in the same office together. They were like brothers. And so the story they have to tell us is kind of heart-wrenching.
And as much as it seems surreal for those of us watching from the outside, they're obviously living it, and it's even more surreal and real for them.
And difficult.
Difficult, yeah. And as you mentioned, such great people. The other interesting person that you spoke with is some of these mental health experts who had close association with the case years ago, before really anybody died. Tell me about that.
Well, this was the custody hearing between then about to be Lori Vallow, or just becoming Lori Vallow, and her previous husband, Joe Ryan. And they were fighting over custody of Tylee, who was then a very young girl. And it was extremely bitter. The court fights were just awful. They were commingled with court fights involving Charles and his children as he was about to get married, to Lori. And his ex-wife was also sort of fighting with him over custody. So it was a mess. And they called in a guardian ad litem for Tylee and a mental health expert to analyze claims that Colby and Lori and Charles were making, that somehow Joe was an abuser, and he was a sexual abuser of Tylee, Colby, and maybe more kids. So these were pretty explosive charges that were being considered at this custody hearing. Thus, the mental health expert, who is a pro at figuring out what's true and what isn't, and who has encountered lots of cases where people will use allegations like that as part of custody fights. But some of them are true, and it's a question of trying to sort out which is which, and there are tells that a real expert can use. So the real expert conducted an investigation. The guardian ad litem conducted an investigation of his own, considered very carefully all the issues involving the two of them, and they made strenuous recommendations that they considered. They presented the court with evidence about Lori, which maybe should have given the court pause, but they also said that Joe Ryan should have shared custody or access to Tylee. Their recommendations were ignored. But not only that, after they presented their recommendations, they were sued Their lawyers were sued. It became so acrimonious that it has lived with them ever since. And it's the reason that they wanted to talk to us to tell us this story. It was a mess and an ugly one, but it was a precursor to so much, and it explains so much that it's really interesting to hear the story.
What else can we expect from the show on Friday night on NBC, Keith?
Well, we learn a lot more about the people involved, and we can see, again, it's when the past is prologue, right? So when you understand where these people have come from, what they've been through, what they've done, and you watch this trajectory of their lives through people they were with, and close friends and relatives, the sister of Joe Ryan, for example, and hear about what happened to them leading up to and after their interactions with Lori. Again, it opens your eyes to a lot of what's happened since.
I believe this is the 4th or 5th Dateline you've produced in the past year about this case.
I keep putting the number, the Roman numerals 4 after the title of this one. So I think it's number 4.
This is number 4. Have you done this many hours on a show, on one particular case, at least in recent memory?
I have to tell you, yes, I have. But this one, we'll do more. And I think 5 is the most on any other story. That was one we also did a podcast about called The Thing About Pam.
Yes.
With the Pam. Yeah.
So 5 is the most, and we haven't even started the real court proceedings on the Daybell case. So right. you could set a record with this one. The other thing I wanted to ask you, I just saw this right before we came on. Tonight, Dateline is about the MacKenzie Lueck case down in Salt Lake City, very close to eastern Idaho.
Right. And some viewers may think, oh, well, that we've heard that story before, but this is not the same. This is the inside story of a pretty remarkable investigation, complete with all the uncertainties and coincidences that such a thing involves. And we finally were able to get inside what happened, and how they figured out what happened and who this young woman was. I guess it's a cautionary tale. It's a fascinating story, and it's a story about what happened to a young woman who was just trying to go about her life and be independent in a way that's made sense to her.
All right. Well, any other big projects in the works?
We are doing, yes, there's a fascinating story out of Oregon, which is coming up. Well, I'm not sure exactly when we'll put it on television, but we're also doing a podcast on that one. This has become kind of, I'm hoping it's becoming a habit because I enjoy doing the podcast. You're able to get into so much more detail in a podcast than you can on television. You don't have to worry about exactly how much video you have and tailor the number of words you can use to the amount of video available. And for the podcast, you just tell the whole story. Freedom is exhilarating.
Is there something about Idaho, Utah, Oregon that you prefer? It seems a lot of your stories are the northwest area of the country.
Yeah, it's a curiosity. It's over the decades now that I've been doing these. It's a strange thing. Maybe it's just because one story leads to another, but you tend to sort of focus in on one part of the country for a few years and then find yourself somewhere else a few years later.
Maybe we just have the most unusual crimes, and unfortunately.
This Idaho situation is one of the stranger ones, that's for sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much, Keith. Don't miss.
Delighted to talk to you again, and it's always good to see you.
You too, and we'll be seeing you Friday night, Dateline NBC, 9 on the East Coast and the West Coast, and the rest of us in Mountain Time and Central Time. You can watch it at 8 o'clock, 2 hours, all new. It's not a lot of this rehash that other shows might do. This is the new stuff.
This is the new stuff, and such a civilized time, 8 o'clock.